Romans chapter 15, verses 14 through 33. This one's actually rather personal for me. One of my favorite movies is a documentary called Jiro Dreams of Sushi. It's about this guy. I think he's passed away now, but his name is Jiro. And he's a national treasure in Japan. He is known as the best sushi chef in Japan and thus the best sushi chef in the world. And in this very simple documentary, they used to follow this life, and Jiro has a very, very focused and simple life. It's called Jiro Dreams of Sushi because in one line he says, "At night, I dream of sushi." All he does every day is try to make the best sushi in the world. And the guy's really, really old. He's probably 80 in time they made the movie. And he still says, "I'm still not there yet. I still want to make the most perfect sushi ever." And so his life completely revolves around a single craft that he's excellent at, and it's paid off. One example is he says he doesn't smoke because he doesn't want the nicotine or the toxins to get in his body, thus come out of his skin. And then when he makes sushi, he uses his bare hands, so he doesn't want the flavor to go in the fish or the rice. When he rides the subway to work, he wears gloves, rubber gloves, because he doesn't want to contaminate his fingers because he wants to make the most perfect sushi. He thinks everything he does in his life, you can taste it in his food, and he wants to get better and better and better every time. There was a biblical scholar in Germany in the 19th century called Johann Gottfried Eichhorn. I don't like his theology, but I was also often inspired by his life. He woke up every day, lived every day, trying to be an excellent scholar. And he was a phenomenal scholar who changed the face of scholarship. There's a story about how he had this maid who would bring him food to his study, and she would go to give him his dinner, and she'd leave a tray out in front of his door. It was close to studying. And then she went home, and the next day she came back. She found the food stone cold. He had never gone to sleep. He just was working the whole time, never even ate his food. I admire that single kind of incredible, intense devotion. Even more weirdly, I have a really good dear friend who probably knows me better than anyone else in the world. And one year for my birthday, he gave me a really weird gift. He gave me a biography of a guy named Chris Benoit, who's one of those professional wrestlers like in WWE, the Hulk Hogan type, The Rock, that sort of thing. I'm not into wrestling, well, maybe a little bit, but I don't really watch that much, and I don't really follow this guy. But Chris Benoit died, by the way. And I found really interesting and compelling and enjoyable about this book was he was like Eichhorn and Jiro, except without wrestling. He lived his entire life completely focused on a singular task. He gave himself over to being extraordinarily good at one thing and one thing only, and that organized his entire life. And I'll give you another example. This is kind of silly, but the Rocky movies, Sylvester Stallone, Rocky 1, Rocky 2, and so on and so forth. There's one movie, Rocky 3, where he's about to fight this guy, and his trainer manager says, "I don't think he'd win." And he's basically saying, "Look, in the last 3 years, you got soft. When you were younger, you were intense. You were an animal. You were ferocious. You just wanted to fight. That's all you did. You had everything to gain and nothing to lose. And in the last 3 years, you've gotten insanely rich. You got mansions. You got cars. You got clothes. Your wife is draped in jewelry and diamonds." He says, "You can't fight anymore. You're not the best anymore." And he's like, "Well, what happened to me?" And Mick, the trainer, says, "Rock, the worst thing happened to you that can happen to any fighter. You got civilized," meaning your life has gotten too bougie. So you're too rich. You're too distracted. You're not focused on one thing and one thing only, being a boxer. Paul comes across that way in this, and when he describes his own life as the apostle to the Gentiles. He wants to live his life completely devoted to preaching to the Gentiles. That's his only mission in life. He's completely focused. But Paul's exceptional, kind of like Moses or Abraham. He is a very special kind of guy. Paul's not like us. Paul never married, had no kids. He could completely devote himself to one task, to preach to the Gentiles. He wakes up in the morning, he thinks, "I want to preach to the Gentiles." He eats his food. "I'm eating food so I can nourish my body, so I can preach to the Gentiles." That's all he does all the time. He was so devoted to this task that he even got beheaded. This is clearly not a man who's looking for a balanced life. I don't think you'll ever hear Paul writing about achieving a good work-life balance. Again, but Paul's exceptional. He's not like you and me. We can't be like Paul. Well, maybe some of you can, but most of us aren't going to be like Paul. So what do we do with this chapter? What's useful about this other than saying, wow, Paul's a very weird, unusual kind of guy, exceptional guy. He's completely different than the rest of us. Again, like Moses, like Abraham. Should we be like Paul? Should we try to be like Paul? I think there are a few unique individuals who might be like Paul, but most of us aren't. And I think most of us don't need to be like Paul. Or I don't think we have to think of our Christian lives as failures if we don't live up to Paul's life, his calling. Paul had a very unique calling, as he says, very specifically, not vaguely. He says, God gave me the priestly duty of proclaiming the gospel of God to the Gentiles. Remember the road to Damascus? Again, not a normal guy, not typical. This is Paul's exotic, singular, strange. He's unusual. But nonetheless, I think there's something we can take away from this chapter. And here's a question I want us to think about, and I don't think we think about it enough. What is your purpose in life? Again, Paul had a purpose. Preach the gospel to the Gentiles. When we think about purpose in life and what Paul is doing, now what we need to do, or what we ought to be doing, there's this Greek word from ancient Greek philosophy called telos. Telos is the end, the goal for which everything is focused. And everything has a different telos. For example, the telos of an acorn is to become an oak tree. The telos of a little whirlybirds, the maple leaf seed, is to become a maple tree. You measure the success or goodness of a thing based on how successfully it's achieved its telos. We all have a different telos. What is your telos? Or in other words, what is your driving motivation that animates everything you do? Meaning, look, imagine all the parts of your life as being little dots, little circles, if you will, right? And you just write them down on a big board. All these circles ought to have a line that leads to a single thing, and that will be your telos. Do you have some animating, life-giving, motivating, driving principle that organizes all the little scattered parts of our lives and gives up kind of coherent meaning? I would think the average college student, if he's rather ambitious and driven and hardworking, I mean, his organizing principles of his life might look something like this. I go to school so I can get good grades. I get good grades so that one day when I graduate, I will get a good job. And by good job, I mean prestige and money and freedom and options. I get a good job so I can get prestige. I get a prestigious good job with money so that I can get married to the right kind of person. And then I want to buy a really nice house and have a really nice car. And then with all these things, nice wife, nice house, nice car, I want to have lots of friends of my own choosing. And I want to go on really nice vacations and buy nice things. And then I want to have really nice kids who are really ambitious and hardworking and send them to the best school I can find, either public or private, so that they can go to college, and so on and so forth. The cycle repeats itself. Okay, that's not really bad at all necessarily. These are not bad things. I'm never going to discourage anyone from working hard and accomplishing great things in their life. Let's be clear about that. It's not a binary. Those are good things. These things can be part of your life. They can't be the reason for your life. These things cannot be the telos of your life, the thing that drives everything you do. Well, actually, they can be. They actually can be the telos of your life to achieve all these things I just listed. But that'll be wrong. Paul's life was simple. Now, when I say simple, I don't mean easy or leisurely. I mean simple as in not too many competing ingredients. There weren't a whole lot of different things going on in his life. Again, Paul had a very singular goal. Preach the gospel to the Gentiles, nothing else. Our lives, by contrast, are complicated, which is the opposite of sinful. Most of you or most of my peers have jobs in secular fields. They have spouses, they have kids, mortgages, houses, cars, things they got to maintain. We got competing and conflicting demands, and they don't always cohere together. We're distracted and pulled apart in many different directions. But still, we can't be like Paul exactly. But there ought to be something that ties our lives together. I know what I'm about to say sounds cliche, and it sounds way too much like a Sunday school simplistic answer. But just as Paul was called to preach the gospel to the Gentiles, we are also called. We have a godly telos, a God-given ends for our lives, something that organizes all our lives together, that makes all those scattered pieces cohere together. We are called to live lives that reflect God and are obedient to God. We're called to live our lives as being made in the image of God. I know it's really complicated, and this will be insultingly simple, but we are called to live out our calling. If you're a student, be an excellent student. Do you have a career or a job? Do your job well with integrity. friends and family and community? Well, love well and be loved well. We could spend the rest of our time, the rest of our lives discussing the ends of our lives, but simply we're here to glorify God. We're here to serve God and obey God and have our lives revolve around that. It's not that the other things don't matter. We have to do those things well, but they have to be done in alignment for the purpose of serving God and his purposes. As far as I can see, there are three options. You can live your life with no telos. You can live your life with no animating principle. You're just going all over the place, doing this, doing that, and it doesn't mean anything. And that's bad. You can live your life with a focused telos. And that's better perhaps than no telos, but you could actually have the wrong telos. You could be pursuing something that doesn't really matter or something that actually is rather destructive to your life. That Chris Benoit guy, he was a phenomenal wrestler. But, he ended up killing himself and killing his wife and killing his kids. It was terrible. He was really, really excellent at one thing and then destroying everything else. I mean, I don't think you're going to end up that way. But the point is, having a telos is not necessarily a good thing. It's got to be the right telos. He drove really, really hard in the wrong direction. Third option, you have a good telos, a godly telos, a telos that God wants you to have, the ends for which God designed for you. Again, our telos is to be a child of God. And that ought to animate everything we do together. And that's something that we talk about in church all the time. That's something we talk about in these Bible studies all the time. How do we understand what our telos is?